Leslie Les Wexner is a name that, for decades, has been synonymous with American retail. He is the visionary billionaire who single-handedly transformed the way millions of people shop for clothing, building an empire that dominated malls across the country. Born in Dayton, Ohio, Wexner's journey began with a simple idea and a small loan from his aunt. In 1963, he opened the first store of the Limited in Columbus, Ohio, focusing on a narrow range of women's sportswear. This concept of specialization stood in stark contrast to the sprawling department stores of the era, which tried to be everything to everyone. Wexner's genius was in recognizing that a focused inventory, quick turnover, and a keen eye for fashion trends could create a retail experience that felt fresh, exciting, and accessible to the average American woman. His initial success with the Limited was just the beginning of a much larger ambition. Over the following decades, Wexner embarked on an aggressive expansion, both by growing his flagship brand and by acquiring or creating new ones. He bought Victoria's Secret when it was a small, struggling lingerie catalog and transformed it into a global phenomenon, a brand that defined sensuality for a generation. He launched Express to capture the younger, trend-conscious market and acquired other household names like Abercrombie and Fitch and Lane Bryant. His company, eventually renamed L Brands, became a titan of industry, with its headquarters in Columbus serving as the nerve center for a sprawling network of stores that stretched from coast to coast and eventually around the world, making Wexner one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Ohio. Wexner's business philosophy was built on meticulous control and a deep understanding of consumer psychology. He obsessed over every detail, from the store lighting and the scent pumped through the vents to the precise way garments were folded and displayed. This attention to detail created a powerful brand identity that resonated deeply with customers, turning a simple shopping trip into an immersive experience. He was not just selling clothes, he was selling an aspirational lifestyle. This ability to shape public perception and desire was a key ingredient in his financial success, but it also hinted at a more complex ability to manage narratives and control environments, a skill that would later be viewed through a much darker lens as more troubling aspects of his world came to light. While his public persona was that of a brilliant and somewhat reclusive retail magnate, behind the scenes, Wexner was building more than just a clothing empire. He was cultivating a vast network of influence that extended deep into the political, financial, and social fabric of his home state and beyond. He became a major philanthropist, donating enormous sums to institutions like Ohio State University and local arts organizations. This generosity earned him a reputation as a civic leader and a benevolent patriarch of Columbus. However, the intricate web of business dealings, financial arrangements, and personal relationships he was weaving behind the polished facade of L Brands would eventually become the subject of intense scrutiny, raising disturbing questions about the true foundations of his immense fortune and power. The carefully curated world of Les Wexner was violently shattered on the morning of March 6, 1985. On that day, Arthur Shapiro, a prominent lawyer and a key figure within Wexner's inner circle, was brutally murdered. The killing was not a random act of violence. It had all the chilling hallmarks of a professional mob-style hit. Shapiro was reportedly on his way to a secret breakfast meeting at a country club in Palm Beach, Florida, when the incident occurred. His car was forced off the road by a red BMW. According to reports, Shapiro fled his vehicle and ran for his life. But his pursuer was relentless. He was chased down and shot once in the back of the head, an execution-style killing that sent shockwaves through the affluent community and the business world. The context surrounding Shapiro's death made the event even more sinister. At the time of his murder, he was not just one of Wexner's trusted legal advisors. He was also a man under immense pressure from federal authorities. The Internal Revenue Service was actively investigating him for a host of financial irregularities. It was discovered that Shapiro had failed to file his personal income tax returns for 7 consecutive years, a serious offense for any citizen, let alone a high-powered attorney. Furthermore, the investigation was delving into his potential involvement in questionable tax shelters, suggesting that his financial dealings were far more complex and potentially illicit than his public profile suggested. This backdrop of a federal probe immediately fueled speculation that his murder was meant to silence him permanently. The brazen and professional nature of the killing led investigators to immediately consider the involvement of organized crime. This was not a robbery gone wrong or a crime of passion. It was a clean, efficient, and public execution designed to send a powerful message. The single shot to the head is a classic signature of a contract killing, intended to ensure death and eliminate any chance of the victim surviving to identify their attacker. The choice of location, a public space in a wealthy enclave, demonstrated a level of audacity and confidence typically associated with seasoned assassins, who are certain they can operate with impunity. Detectives were left with a crime scene that screamed mafia, but the victims' connections led them into the world of high finance and corporate retail, a far cry from the usual mob battlegrounds. The murder of Arthur Shapiro remains officially unsolved to this day, a cold case that has haunted law enforcement and investigative journalists for decades. The lack of resolution has only deepened the mystery and allowed countless theories to fester. Who did Shapiro know that would want him dead? What information did he possess that was so dangerous it warranted his execution? Was his death connected to his work for Les Wexner and the Limited, his own financial troubles, or something else entirely? These questions became the starting point for a sprawling, unofficial investigation into the dark underbelly of Wexner's empire, a world where the clean lines of corporate America appeared to blur with the shadowy contours of organized crime. In the years following the unsolved murder of Arthur Shapiro, the Columbus Police Department's Organized Crime Bureau compiled an extensive and explosive report. This document, which came to be known as the Shapiro Murder File, was completed in 1991 and represented a deep dive into the potential motives behind the killing. Because the execution so closely resembled a La Cosa Nostra hit, investigators cast a wide net, looking into the operations of major crime families across the country. They examined the potential involvement of powerful mafia organizations from Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, as well as the notorious Genovese crime family based in New York. The file was not just a homicide investigation, it became an intricate analysis of the complex and often hidden relationships connecting legitimate businesses to the criminal underworld. The report's most startling revelations centered on the business activities of Les Wexner's company, The Limited. The investigation moved beyond the immediate circumstances of Shapiro's death and began to scrutinize the corporate structure and partnerships that had fueled the retailer's meteoric rise. The Shapiro murder file meticulously detailed what it described as interactive relationships between Wexner's corporate interests and a number of individuals and entities that had long been associated with organized crime. This was a bombshell discovery, suggesting that the foundation of one of America's most celebrated retail success stories might be intertwined with shadowy forces that operated far outside the law. The file painted a picture of a business world where the lines between corporate boardrooms and mob backrooms were disturbingly thin. One of the most significant changes noted in the police file occurred in the immediate aftermath of the killing. According to the report, Shapiro's own law firm, Schwartz, Shapiro, Kelm, and Warren, acted with remarkable speed. Within hours of Shapiro's homicide, the document states, the firm officially changed its name, scrubbing the murdered partner's name from its letterhead and rebranding as Schwartz, Kelm, Warren, and Rubenstein. Following this swift alteration, the firm's senior partner, Stanley Schwartz, took over the management of the lucrative account for the Limited. This rapid move to distance the firm from Shapiro and secure the relationship with their most important client struck investigators as unusual, adding another layer of intrigue to the already complex case, and raising questions about what the surviving partners may have known or feared. Ultimately, the Shapiro murder file served as a critical, albeit unofficial, roadmap for understanding the forces at play around Les Wexner. It transformed the investigation from a simple murder case into a sprawling inquiry into corporate America's potential links to the mafia. While the file did not definitively solve the murder, it provided a chilling context for it, suggesting that Arthur Shapiro may have been a casualty of a much larger and more dangerous game. The document became a foundational text for journalists and researchers trying to unravel the mysteries surrounding Wexner, his finances, and the powerful and often menacing figures who moved in his orbit, including one who was yet to become a household name, Jeffrey Epstein. The Shapiro murder file brought to light several specific and deeply troubling connections between Les Wexner's business empire and known organized crime figures. One of the most prominent links was with the Edward J. DeBartolo Corporation, a massive real estate development company from Youngstown, Ohio, a city with a long and storied history of mob activity. The police report noted a long history of partnership and business dealings between Wexner and Edward J. DeBartolo, Sr. DeBartolo was a powerful mall developer, and his company was instrumental in building the shopping centers where the Limited and its subsidiary brands thrived. However, the report also bluntly stated that DeBartolo allegedly had strong ties to the Genovese La Rocca crime family, one of the most powerful mafia syndicates in the country. This partnership placed Wexner's business in direct collaboration with a figure widely suspected of being connected to the mob. Another critical link exposed in the report involved the company responsible for transporting the Limited's merchandise across the country. Walsh Trucking Company was a major hauler for Wexner's brands, a logistical linchpin in his retail operation. The company was run by Frank Walsh, who was the son of Frank Funzi Thierry, a notorious front boss for the formidable Genovese crime family. This connection meant that a company controlled by the son of a high-ranking mafioso was deeply embedded in the day-to-day operations of the Limited. The relationship was so cozy that in July 1984, the New York State Organized Crime Task Force subpoenaed Frank Walsh's bank records, and the address listed for the subpoena was 1 Limited Parkway, the corporate headquarters of the Limited itself. This detail suggested an extraordinary level of integration between the mob-linked trucking firm and Wexner's company. The web of questionable associations did not end with trucking and real estate. The police file also highlighted Wexner's business dealings with the infamous industrialist Armand Hammer. In August 1985, just 5 months after Shapiro's murder, a Wexner-controlled company called Samax acquired a 70% stake in Omni Exploration, an oil company founded by Hammer. Armand Hammer was a globally renowned figure, but he was also a man with a deeply checkered past, known for his close associations with Soviet intelligence and his own documented ties to organized crime figures. For Wexner to enter into a major business deal with such a controversial character, especially so soon after the mob-style execution of his lawyer, raised serious questions about the circles in which he was operating and the nature of the advice he was receiving. These connections, detailed by law enforcement in the Shapiro murder file, paint a stark picture. They suggest that the growth of the Limited was not simply a story of retail genius and business acumen. Instead, it appears to have been facilitated by a series of strategic alliances with individuals and companies that had documented or strongly suspected ties to powerful organized crime networks. Whether these relationships were a matter of convenience, a necessary cost of doing business in certain industries, or part of a more deliberate and sinister partnership remains a central question. What is clear, however, is that the world Les Wexner inhabited was far more complex and dangerous than the cheerful branding of Victoria's Secret or Express would ever suggest. Into this complex and shadowy world of high finance, retail dominance, and alleged mob connections stepped a mysterious and charismatic figure named Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, a former teacher who had a brief and controversial stint at the investment bank Bear Stearns, was introduced to Les Wexner in the mid-1980s, not long after Arthur Shapiro's murder. He quickly ingratiated himself with the billionaire, becoming his closest confidant and protege. Wexner seemed to see something brilliant in Epstein, entrusting him with more and more responsibility over his personal and professional life. This relationship grew to an extraordinary degree, culminating in Wexner granting Epstein a comprehensive power of attorney, which, well, effectively gave him total control over the Wexner family fortune. The dynamic between the two men was highly unusual and has been the subject of intense speculation. Wexner, a famously private and controlling executive, handed the keys to his financial kingdom to a man with a dubious resume and no formal qualifications as a money manager. Epstein became Wexner's sole financial advisor, managing his billions, overseeing his investments, and directing his philanthropic endeavors through the Wexner Foundation. He moved into a guest house on Wexner's sprawling Ohio estate and was given access to the billionaire's private jet and New York City townhouse. For all intents and purposes, Epstein became the public face of Wexner's financial operations, a gatekeeper who managed access to one of America's richest men. This relationship, however, has been re-examined in a much more sinister light following Epstein's arrest for sex trafficking. It is now alleged that Epstein used his position as Wexner's money manager not to grow the fortune, but to systematically loot it. Accusations have surfaced that Epstein misappropriated staggering sums of money, potentially over $1 billion, from Wexner's accounts over the years. This raises a critical question. Was Wexner a willing partner in these financial maneuvers, or was he a victim? Some researchers have theorized that Epstein, with his rumored connections to foreign intelligence agencies like the Mossad and the CIA, was brought in to help manage Wexner's dirty money, and that he may have used compromising information to blackmail and control the billionaire. The true nature of their bond remains one of the central puzzles of the entire saga. David Sturtz, a former Ohio inspector general who investigated the pair, reportedly referred to Epstein as Wexner's boyfriend, hinting at a level of personal intimacy that went beyond a typical professional relationship. The Hulu documentary Victoria's Secret Angels and Demons further explored how Epstein leveraged his immense power, derived directly from his connection to Wexner, to create a network of abuse, preying on young women and girls by using the allure of the Victoria's Secret brand as bait. The story of Jeffrey Epstein's rise is inextricably linked to Les Wexner's patronage, and honestly, it is impossible to understand one without scrutinizing the other. The immense wealth and influence that Les Wexner accumulated over the decades did not just stay within the confines of his corporate empire, it radiated outward, fundamentally reshaping the power structure of Columbus, Ohio, and the entire state. Critics and observers began to use the term Wexner Mafia to describe the tight-knit circle of Wexner and his powerful associates who seemed to wield near absolute control over local politics, business, and civic institutions. This was not a mafia in the traditional sense of organized crime, but rather a reference to a powerful clique that operated with immense authority, often behind the scenes, to protect its interests and enforce its agenda. Their influence was so profound that, honestly, challenging them was widely considered career suicide in Ohio's professional circles. The most prominent example of this influence can be seen in the relationship between Wexner and Ohio State University, one of the largest public universities in the United States. Wexner and his foundation have been colossal donors to the university, contributing hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. This philanthropy has resulted in his name being emblazoned on buildings across the campus, most notably the Wexner Center for the Arts and the Wexner Medical Center. While this generosity has undoubtedly benefited the university in many ways, it has also given him and his allies an extraordinary level of sway over the institution's governance and direction. It created a dynamic where the university's leadership was often seen as beholden to the whims of its chief benefactor. This power was allegedly put on full display with the departure of OSU President Gordon G. G, a popular and nationally respected university administrator, was reportedly pushed out of his position because he failed to sufficiently kowtow to the Wexner Group. The incident was seen by many as a clear demonstration of the Wexner Mafia's power. If you did not align with their interests, you would be removed. This control extends to shaping public narratives and suppressing unfavorable reporting. The immense advertising dollars and civic influence controlled by Wexner and his allies can create a media environment where journalists are hesitant to dig too deeply into sensitive topics, fearing professional or financial repercussions. This has arguably contributed to the long silence surrounding many of the troubling questions about his business dealings and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The concept of the Wexner Mafia illustrates how extreme wealth can be translated into a form of private governance, where a small group of unelected individuals can exert more influence over a community's destiny than its elected officials. This concentration of power allows them to control key institutions, manage public perception, and create a protective barrier around their activities. It fosters an environment of deference and fear, where challenging the established order is seen as futile and dangerous. This system of control in Ohio provided the perfect ecosystem for a figure like Jeffrey Epstein to operate for years without serious scrutiny, shielded by the immense power and influence of his patron. The web of intrigue surrounding Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein extends beyond the realms of retail and organized crime, venturing into the murky world of international espionage and covert government operations. One of the most explosive, though less substantiated, allegations links Wexner's orbit to the infamous Iran-Contra affair of the 1980s. This political scandal involved a secret United States government operation to sell arms to Iran, which was subject to an arms embargo in order to fund the Contras, a right-wing rebel group in Nicaragua. The operation was run by a shadowy network of intelligence operatives and private contractors, many with ties to the CIA. The alleged connection to Wexner comes through one of these contractors, a CIA-linked airline named Southern Air Transport. Southern Air Transport was a key logistical player in the Iran-Contra scheme, flying weapons and other supplies for the covert operations. Whispers and reporting from researchers have suggested potential financial or logistical links between Wexner's business interests and this clandestine network. While concrete, verifiable evidence remains elusive, the mere suggestion of such a connection adds another disturbing layer to the puzzle. It posits that the financial and logistical empire Wexner built, including its vast trucking and transportation networks, could have been leveraged for purposes far beyond shipping clothing to malls. This theory places Wexner not just in the company of mobsters, but potentially in the orbit of powerful intelligence figures engaged in illegal covert activities on behalf of the state. These intelligence whispers are amplified by the enigmatic background of Jeffrey Epstein himself. Long before his crimes became public knowledge, Epstein cultivated a reputation as a man with deep connections to the world of spies. He frequently hinted at working for intelligence agencies like the CIA or Israel's Mossad, and his social circle included former heads of state and prominent figures from the global intelligence community. Many researchers believe that Epstein was not merely a financial criminal, but an intelligence asset, whose primary function was to gather compromising information, what's often called compromat, on powerful people for the purpose of blackmail. His operation, funded by Wexner's fortune, could have been an elaborate honey trap designed to ensnare global elites. If this theory holds true, it completely reframes the Wexner-Epstein relationship. Wexner may not have been just a patron or a victim, but a key component of a sophisticated intelligence operation. It would suggest that Epstein was introduced to Wexner specifically to gain control of his immense resources, his fortune, his private jet, his international connections, and use them as a platform for espionage. This would help explain Wexner's seemingly blind trust in Epstein and his willingness to cede so much control. It also connects back to the murder of Arthur Shapiro. If Shapiro had uncovered knowledge of these deeper, more dangerous connections, it would provide a powerful motive for his permanent silencing by forces far more powerful than the traditional mafia. For decades, the dark world of Jeffrey Epstein and his powerful associates operated largely in the shadows, protected by wealth, influence, and a wall of silence. However, beginning in the late 2000s, that wall began to crack. The initial police investigation in Palm Beach, Florida, led to a notoriously lenient deal in 2008, where Epstein pleaded guilty to state charges and served just 13 months in a private wing of the county jail, with generous work release privileges. While this deal was a travesty of justice, it put Epstein on the public radar and planted the seeds for his eventual downfall. The relentless work of journalists and the brave testimony of his victims kept the story alive, refusing to let it be buried by the passage of time and the power of his enablers. The true unraveling began in July 2019, when federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein on sex trafficking charges. This time, the allegations were far more serious, and the political climate had shifted dramatically in the wake of the Me Too movement. The federal case threatened to expose the full extent of his criminal enterprise, and most importantly, to name his powerful co-conspirators and clients. His arrest sent a shockwave through the global elite, as powerful men who had been part of his social circle scrambled to distance themselves. The focus inevitably turned back to his primary benefactor, Les Wexner, who was forced to publicly address his long and intimate relationship with the now disgraced financier, claiming he was embarrassed and had completely severed ties with Epstein over a decade earlier. Epstein's mysterious death in his jail cell in August 2019, officially ruled a suicide, only intensified the speculation and conspiracy theories. To many, it seemed too convenient, a final act of silencing that ensured he could never testify against his powerful friends. His death, however, did not end the inquiry. Instead, it shifted the focus to his longtime associate and alleged co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell. Her arrest in July 2020 was a pivotal moment, as she was seen as the keeper of Epstein's secrets. The world watched her trial closely, hoping she would reveal the names of the powerful men involved in the sex trafficking ring. Her conviction was a landmark victory for the victims, but it did not lead to the widespread exposure of Epstein's network that many had hoped for. The legal fallout from the Epstein case forced Les Wexner to take steps to separate himself from the scandal. He stepped down as CEO of L Brands and began to sell off parts of the retail empire he had spent a lifetime building. He maintained that he was completely unaware of Epstein's criminal behavior and was himself a victim of Epstein's financial manipulations. However, the sheer proximity and duration of their relationship, coupled with Wexner's decision to grant Epstein total financial control, have made these claims difficult for many to accept. The unraveling of Epstein's web has left a permanent stain on Wexner's legacy, forever linking his name not just to retail success, but to one of the most sordid criminal conspiracies of the 21st century. Despite years of investigation, explosive reporting, and high-profile court cases, the saga of Les Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein, and the so-called Ohio Mafia remains shrouded in a fog of mystery. A number of critical questions are still unanswered, leaving a deeply unsettling void at the heart of the story. First and foremost, the murder of Arthur Shapiro in 1985 remains officially unsolved. Who ordered the hit, and why was he permanently silenced? Was it connected to his work for Wexner, his own tax troubles, his knowledge of mob connections within the limited, or something far more sinister involving intelligence operations? Without a resolution to this foundational crime, the full story of the events that followed can never be truly understood. His death stands as a cold, brutal testament to the dangerous secrets that lay just beneath the surface. The true nature of the relationship between Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein is another profound and enduring mystery. Was Wexner a naive and trusting mentor who was duped and manipulated by a masterful con artist? Or was he a willing participant, a partner who understood and perhaps even directed Epstein's activities? The claim that Epstein stole over $1 billion from one of the world's most meticulous and controlling businessmen without him noticing for over a decade strikes many as implausible. What was the real arrangement between them? Was it blackmail, a shared ideology, a business partnership in illicit activities, or something else entirely? Without a full and honest accounting from Wexner himself, the public is left to speculate about the dynamic that enabled so much destruction. Furthermore, the full extent of the intelligence connections remains buried. Was Jeffrey Epstein truly an asset for an agency like the CIA or Mossad? Was his sex trafficking operation a sophisticated blackmail scheme designed to compromise powerful figures for geopolitical leverage? And if so, what role did Les Wexner's fortune and resources play in facilitating this operation? The whispers of connections to Iran-Contra and other covert activities hint at a story that is much bigger than just corporate greed or sexual predation. It suggests a potential intersection of crime, business, and espionage at the highest levels of global power, a deep state reality that is often dismissed as conspiracy theory, but stubbornly persists in the evidence trail of this case. Ultimately, the biggest question that remains is one of accountability. Jeffrey Epstein is dead, and Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison, but the vast network that supported, enabled, and benefited from their crimes has largely escaped justice. The powerful men who flew on Epstein's jet, visited his island, and participated in his schemes have remained mostly anonymous and unpunished. The story of Wexner and Epstein is a chilling case study in how wealth, power, and influence can be used to create a system of impunity, a private world that operates by its own set of rules, far from the reach of conventional law enforcement. Until these fundamental questions are answered and true accountability is achieved, the ghosts of this sordid affair will continue to haunt the corridors of power in America and beyond.